On the morning of March 4, 1918, a Navy collier called the Cyclops left Barbados, fully loaded on a calm sea in clear weather. She was 542 feet long, displaced 19,000 tons, and carried 306 men, plus a hold full of manganese ore, bound for Baltimore. The Atlantic that week was glass. There were no storms in any of the surrounding logs. There were no distress signals. There was no debris. There was no wreck. She simply did not arrive. That alone is strange. What is stranger is that the Navy, after 107 years of ocean searches, satellite mapping, and submarine archaeology, still officially classifies the loss as cause unknown. Not theorized, not probable, unknown. And the Cyclops is not the strangest engineering disaster modern science refuses to explain. She is number 3 on this list. Engineering, when it works, is invisible. A bridge holds, a reactor cools, a platform stays upright in the North Atlantic. We notice none of it. We are only allowed to notice when something fails. And when something fails badly enough, the failure gets a number, a commission, a stamped report, and a paragraph in a textbook saying, "We now understand what went wrong." Most of the time, that paragraph is honest. Sometimes it is not. What follows are 10 engineering disasters where the official paragraph is either thin or wrong or quietly contradicted by the evidence the Commission itself collected. Some of these cases involve metallurgy that, on paper, should have held. Some involve forces that the design accounted for and that still tore the structure apart. 2 of them are not officially solved at all. One was classified for 33 years and is, in 2026, still partially classified. The thread that ties them is not conspiracy. It is something quieter. In each case, the people closest to the wreckage, the metallurgists, the divers, the survivors, the engineers who signed the original drawings, said something different from what the final report concluded. Sometimes they said it in letters, sometimes in inquiry transcripts. Once, in marginal notes found inside a file cabinet 11 years after the cabinet's owner had died. By the time we reach number 1, you will understand why a Soviet rocket failure from 1990 is still treated, by the people who were there, as something other than a rocket failure. Counting down, 10 to 1. December 28, 1879, the east coast of Scotland. The Tay Bridge, a 2-mile cast iron rail crossing connecting Dundee to Wormit, was 19 months old. It had been called the longest bridge in the world. The chief engineer, Thomas Booch, had been knighted for it 5 months earlier. That night, in a wind that the local barometers logged at force 11, a 6-carriage North British Railway train, the 520 from Burnt Island, started across. There were 75 people on board. A signalman at the south end watched the lights of the train enter the central span, what the workers called the high girders, and disappear. He waited. He could see the lights of Dundee on the far side. He could not see the train. The next morning, divers found the locomotive lying on its side in the mud of the Tay, with its regulator still open. They found the wheel arrangement, the carriages, the bodies. They found, in fact, almost everything they expected to find. What they could not find, in any quantity that satisfied the inquiry, was the iron itself. The 13 central girders had not so much fallen as disintegrated. The bolts had pulled clean through the lugs they were supposed to hold. The cast iron columns had snapped at the base in a way that on later examination looked less like fracture and more like crumbling. The official court of inquiry in 1880 blamed Booch for poor design and the foundry at Wormit for poor casting. That paragraph closed the case. Booch died 10 months later. What the paragraph did not address, and what the foreman of the Wormit foundry said in a sworn statement that did not make it into the published report, is that the iron from the central span, the iron that crumbled, had been tested at the works in October of 1878 and had passed. The same batch, the same molds, the same furnace. He kept the test certificates. They were among his effects when he died in 1903. The microtheory is fatigue from wind oscillation, a phenomenon barely understood at the time. Maybe. 14 months of service is short for fatigue failure in cast iron. Modern metallurgical reviews of recovered fragments, the most recent in 2014, describe the structure of the failed columns as inconsistent with the structure of the columns that survived, as if two different kinds of iron had been used. The foundry insists they were not. What happened in number 5 is going to make a metallurgical mystery look procedural. Surfside, Florida, June 24, 2021, 1:22 in the morning. A 12-story residential building called Champlain Towers South, built in 1981, came down. Not partially, not in stages the way controlled demolitions go. The northeast corner fell first, and within 12 seconds, the rest of the L-shaped tower followed, leaving only the perpendicular wing standing. 98 people died. The building had been under engineering review since 2018. A consultant named Frank Morabito had documented major structural damage to the pool deck slab and the parking garage columns. Repairs had been costed, voted on, delayed, and were due to begin that summer. None of this is mysterious. The mystery is what triggered the collapse on that specific night, with no earthquake, no storm, and no construction work in progress. The federal investigation, run by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is still open at the time of this recording, 5 years in. Their preliminary findings point at long-term saltwater corrosion of the rebar in the pool deck, leading to a punching shear failure of one slab, which then progressed. Two details, both in the public NIST record, complicate that. The first is that residents on the 8th floor reported, at around 1 a.m., a creaking noise from the parking levels, not from the pool deck. The creaking went on for 15 to 20 minutes before the collapse. Survivors who were awake described it as a slow groan. The pool deck first theory does not predict a 20-minute audible warning from the structure 2 levels below. The second is that the collapse pattern, when modeled, does not match a punching shear initiation. It matches a column failure at parking level B1, near the location residents heard the groaning. NIST has not yet explained the discrepancy. Their working language, in the most recent quarterly update, is that the initiating event remains under analysis. The micro-theory most engineers privately accept is that the pool deck failure triggered the collapse, but was itself triggered by something else. A column already at the edge, possibly for years, possibly for reasons no one has yet found in the records. The records are voluminous and incomplete in roughly equal measure. August 14, 2018, just before noon, in a thunderstorm. The Polcevera Viaduct in Genoa, designed by the engineer Riccardo Morandi and opened in 1967, was carrying its usual midday traffic on the A10 motorway. Pylon 9, one of 3 concrete towers supporting the central spans by pre-stressed cable stays, gave way. 210 meters of bridge fell into the valley below. 43 people died. Morandi himself had warned in a 1979 paper that became famous in Italian engineering circles only after the collapse, that the bridge's stay cables would corrode in the marine air of Genoa faster than the original calculations had assumed. He recommended replacement of the cables every 20 years. They were never fully replaced. By 2018, some of them were 51 years old. That is the official story, and it is broadly accepted. The detail that engineers in Genoa have not been able to make peace with is the timing. Pylon 9 was the most recently inspected of the 3. It had been examined in February 2018, 6 months before the collapse, by a contractor named Spear, working under the operator Autostrade per l'Italia. The inspection report rated Pylon 9 stays at a maintenance level requiring monitoring, not replacement. Pylons 10 and 11 were rated worse. Pylons 10 and 11 did not fall. The cable that failed first, identified after the wreckage, was a southern stay on Pylon 9. When it was recovered from the rubble, the inner steel strands were corroded as expected. The outer concrete sheath was not. The outer sheath was, in the words of an inspector who testified at the criminal trial in 2022, in better condition than concrete on the same bridge that was 3 years old. It is as if the cable had failed from the inside out, in a way the visual inspections were not designed to catch, and never could have caught. Italian prosecutors have a paragraph for this. It is not the same paragraph the bridge's original engineers had. August 1st, 2007, 6:05 p.m., rush hour, 85 degrees. The Interstate 35W Mississippi River Bridge, a steel truss arch carrying 8 lanes over the river in the middle of downtown Minneapolis, dropped its main span into the water. 13 cars and a school bus went with it. 13 people died, 145 were injured. The bridge was 40 years old. The National Transportation Safety Board determined the cause within the year: undersized gusset plates at node U10. The original 1967 design had specified gusset plates 1 inch thick, where, by modern calculation, they should have been at least 2 inches. The plates had been carrying loads they were never engineered for. On the afternoon of the collapse, the deck was loaded with construction materials for an ongoing resurfacing job, and the gusset plates at U10, after 4 decades of cyclic stress, finally bowed and tore. The part that bothers the engineers who worked the wreck recovery, and one of them, a man named Aaron Fjellstad, said this on the record to a Minneapolis Star-Tribune reporter in 2012, is that the U10 plates, when pulled from the river, showed a fracture pattern that did not match a slow yield. They had not bent and torn, they had snapped, and the snap had originated at a point about 4 inches in from the edge, at a location that, in the photographs, shows what looks like a small, cylindrical hole. There is no hole in the original 1967 drawings. There was no hole specified in any of the maintenance work logged on the bridge. The hole, if it is a hole, has not been explained. The NTSB report does not mention it. Fjellstad, in the same interview, said, "I'm not telling you it caused anything. I'm telling you nobody has told me what it was." He died in 2019. The plate sits in storage at a federal facility in Virginia. What happened in number 4, on a North Atlantic platform in February of 1982, is a different category of unanswered. 5 cases in, you may be noticing something. The pattern is not that the engineers were wrong, or that the materials failed in mysterious ways. The pattern is that, in each case, there is a small, specific, documented detail that the official report either does not address or addresses unconvincingly. A foundry foreman with a stack of test certificates, a column at parking level B1, a southern cable in better outer condition than 3-year-old concrete, a small cylindrical hole. These details, taken individually, are tolerable. Engineering accepts that not every fact will fit. Taken together, across 40 years and 3 continents, they begin to feel like something else. We are halfway down. The next 5 are stranger. December 15th, 1967, 5:04 p.m., in the middle of rush hour traffic between Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Canoga, Ohio. The Silver Bridge, a 1928 Eyebar suspension bridge over the Ohio River, dropped without warning. 37 vehicles went into the water. 46 people died. The cause, as established by the 1971 NTSB report, was a single fractured Eyebar, Eyebar 330, in the north chord. A 0.1-inch deep stress corrosion crack had been growing in the Eyebar's eye since shortly after construction. After 39 years, on a cold Friday afternoon, it propagated. The Eyebar parted. With one link of the chain gone, the entire suspension system unzipped. The detail that has unsettled metallurgists for 60 years is the location of the crack. Stress corrosion cracking in high-strength steel typically grows on a surface exposed to moisture. Eyebar 330's crack was on an inner surface, a surface that had been hidden inside the closed eye of the link, pressed against a steel pin, with no significant air exposure since the bridge was assembled in 1928. There is no good model for stress corrosion cracking initiating on such a surface. 2 metallurgists on the original investigation, J. Bennett and S. Mindlin, said in their 1969 technical paper that the crack appeared to predate the bridge's assembly. Their suggestion, in dry technical language, was that the bar had been delivered to the site already cracked. The mill, a Pittsburgh works that closed in 1953, had no surviving records. The micro-theory is that the crack came in with the steel. Maybe. The same heat number was used in Eyebars on a sister bridge, the St. Mary's Bridge, downstream. The St. Mary's Bridge stood until it was deliberately demolished in 1971. Inspection of its Eyebars, before demolition, found no comparable cracking on inner surfaces. Same steel, same era, same design. One bridge eats itself from the inside, the other does not. What happened in number 3, on a calm sea in the spring of 1918, has no metallurgy at all to explain. June 3rd, 1973, just after 3 in the afternoon, at the Le Bourget Air Show outside Paris, the Soviet supersonic transport, the Tupolev Tu-144, prototype number 77,102, was performing what was supposed to be a routine demonstration pass. 250,000 spectators were on the field. The aircraft completed a low flyby, climbed steeply, and at the top of the climb pitched over and came apart in mid-air. Fragments fell on the village of Gusset. The 6 crew aboard were killed. 8 people on the ground died, including 3 children. 15 houses burned. The cause has never been formally agreed. The French Commission of Inquiry, working with the Soviet team, produced a final report in 1976 that listed pilot avoidance of a French Mirage chase plane as the probable trigger for the unusual climb. The Soviets did not officially accept the finding. They issued no public counter-report. Internally, according to engineers later interviewed by aviation historian Howard Moon, they believed the cause was a flight control input from the onboard flight engineer, Vladimir Benderov, who was filming the pass with a handheld camera and may have struck a control yoke. Either explanation works for the climb. Neither explains the breakup. The Tu-144's structural certification envelope at the speed and altitude of the recovery attempt should have been comfortable. The aircraft did not stall, did not flutter, did not exceed its G-load limit on telemetry. Telemetry, in fact, recorded normal control surface positions up to 0.6 seconds before the disintegration began. Then, the recording stops. The detail that matters, and that has never been included in either the French or the Soviet report, was found in a 1982 paper by a Tupolev engineer named A. Pukov, who had been on the recovery team at Gusset. In a section discussing material samples from the wreckage, he describes a curious banding pattern in the titanium of the leading edge of the left canard. The bands ran perpendicular to the airflow direction, at intervals of approximately 4 millimeters. Pukov did not propose an explanation. He noted only that the pattern was not present on the right canard, recovered from the same field, and was not reproducible by any test he could devise. Pukov retired in 1991. His paper is in the Tupolev Bureau archive in Moscow. It has, as far as I can determine, never been translated into English. February 15, 1982, in a winter storm on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, the semi-submersible drilling rig Ocean Ranger went down. She was at the time the largest mobile offshore drilling unit in the world, rated for 100-foot seas, and considered unsinkable in the same casual way the Titanic was. 84 men were aboard. None survived. The official Royal Commission of Inquiry, completed in 1984, concluded that a wave broke a porthole on the chain locker, water flooded the ballast control room, and the resulting electrical short caused the ballast valves to open in the wrong sequence. The rig listed, then capsized. That is, on the documents, the answer. The detail that has never been satisfactorily explained appears in the inquiry transcripts and not in the final report. 3 different witnesses, 2 from the support vessel Seaforth Highlander, 1 from the standby vessel Bolton Tor, independently testified that, in the hour before Ocean Ranger went down, they saw a column of light over the rig. The light, in the testimony of the Seaforth's mate, was vertical, narrow, and the color of welding arc blue. It lasted, by his estimate, 30 to 40 seconds. It was not a flare. It was not a navigation light. It did not move with the rig as the rig pitched. It stayed where it was when the rig moved out from under it, and then it was gone. The mate's name was Eric Drover. He was 31. He gave his testimony on March 3rd, 1982. The transcript runs to 16 pages. The Royal Commission did not address the column of light testimony in its final report. It is not mentioned in the index. It is not refuted. It is simply absent. Drover did not raise it again publicly. He died in 2004. His daughter, in a 2017 interview with Atlantic Insight, said, "My father saw something that night he could not explain. He told the inquiry. They wrote it down, and then it was as if they had not. What happened in number 3 is older than electricity, and it has fewer answers than this. I made you a promise at the beginning of this list that the case at number 1 would, when we got to it, justify being held there. I want to add a small modification to that promise. Number 1 is not the strangest engineering disaster on this list because its cause is the most exotic. It is the strangest because the cause was, briefly, written down by men who had been inside the facility. And then, between 1990 and 2007, the document containing what they had written down was reclassified 3 times, copied incompletely, and exists now in a form that does not match what those men remember. We will get to it. For now, 3. We came back to this one. Of the 10 cases on this list, the Cyclops is the only one that has nothing to investigate, because there is nothing to recover. She was a Proteus-class collier, commissioned in 1910, 542 feet long, 19,000 tons displacement. On March 4th, 1918, she sailed from Barbados for Baltimore with 306 men aboard and a cargo of 11,000 tons of manganese ore. Her route would have taken her north through what is now called the Bermuda Triangle. Her last known position, given by the captain, George Worley, in a routine radio check, was approximately 200 nautical miles east of the Florida coast on March 9th. After that, nothing. There were no storms in the area on the route during the relevant window. The naval logs of the dozen vessels that searched the Cyclops' track in March and April of 1918 record calm to moderate seas, no wreckage, no oil slick, no debris field, no bodies. Nothing washed up on any coast, north, south, or in the islands, that was identified as belonging to her, then or since. The first specific detail, and the one that turns the Cyclops from a wartime casualty into something else, concerns her cargo. Manganese ore, when wet, can shift in the holds and capsize a ship. This is the most cited explanation. The cargo had been loaded at Rio de Janeiro under the supervision of a port officer whose certifying signature appears on the bill of lading. His name was Lieutenant Pedro Luis Gomez. According to a letter Gomez wrote to his sister in late March 1918, 4 days before the Cyclops would have been overdue, he had personally re-inspected the holds because of his concerns about the high water content of the ore that had been delivered. He noted in the letter that he had refused to certify the load until additional drainage time had been allowed at quayside. He certified it on March 1st. The Cyclops sailed 3 days later. A wet cargo capsize at speed in calm water is not impossible. It is, in the Cyclops' case, unsupported because no oil slick or debris ever surfaced. A 19,000-ton ship that capsized would have left a recognizable signature on the surface for days. There is no record of one. The second specific detail is older and stranger. Captain George Worley's name was not George Worley. He had been born in Sandstedt, Germany in 1862 as Johann Friedrich Wickmann. He emigrated to the United States, became a citizen, and changed his name in 1898. In 1918, the Cyclops was sailing in wartime. Her captain was a German-born American Navy officer commanding a ship full of strategic ore into a war zone 3 weeks before the war's most active U-boat operations off the United States East Coast. The most cited theory after wet cargo is U-boat attack. The German Imperial Navy's records captured intact at the end of the war, list every U-boat sortie of the period and every confirmed and claimed sinking. The Cyclops appears in none of them. The Germans, at the end of a war they were losing, had no reason to omit a kill. The micro-theory of foul play by Worley, on the suspicion of pro-German sympathy, was investigated by US naval intelligence in 1918 and again in 1919. They found nothing. Worley's two surviving daughters, one of whom, Virginia, was 23 at the time, gave testimony in 1919 that does not survive in the public record. The transcripts, according to a 2003 FOIA inquiry by the historian Marvin Barash, were destroyed in a 1973 Navy archive fire that affected, among other things, the entire World War I inquiry holdings. What no theory accounts for, and what has remained the central detail of the case since 1918, is the silence. Cyclops carried, in 1918, a Marconi radio with a 500-mile range. Worley's last transmission was routine, brief, and contained no mention of weather or cargo trouble. He sent no further transmission. None of his crew sent one. A ship sinking from cargo shift takes minutes. A ship sinking from a torpedo can take seconds. Either way, the radio operator typically gets one word out. The Cyclops' radio operator, James A. Burgess, did not. She does not appear on any sonar survey of the relevant ocean floor. She has been searched for by US Navy and by private expedition in 1968, 1986, 2002, and most recently in 2018 by the Bermuda Triangle Mapping Project. The ocean floor in the relevant search zone is well mapped. She is not there. April 26, 1986, at 1:23 in the morning local time, the number 4 reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukrainian SSR underwent a steam explosion, followed by what is now classified with reasonable confidence as a partial prompt critical excursion in the lower core. The roof of the reactor hall blew off. The graphite caught fire. 31 people died in the immediate aftermath. The long count is still moving. The cause of the explosion, on the engineering level, is established. A late-night safety test, run in violation of protocol, with the reactor in a state of xenon poisoning, with the operators withdrawing control rods well past safe limits, produced a positive void coefficient surge that the RBMK reactor's design, particularly its graphite-tipped control rods, converted into an inserted reactivity at the moment of attempted shutdown. The reactor went prompt critical. The accepted explanation is comprehensive and, for the engineering community, closed. The reason this case is on this list is not the cause of the explosion. It is what was visible above the reactor in the seconds during it. The first witnesses on the scene, firefighters of the Pripyat Brigade, dispatched at 1:26 a.m., 6 of whom died within the next month from acute radiation syndrome, reported in 3 separate sets of testimony given between April 26th and May 4th of 1986 that above the wrecked reactor hall, beginning seconds after the second explosion, a column of light rose vertically into the night sky. The light, by the testimony of Senior Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, was narrow, no more than a few meters in width, sharply defined at the edges, and the color, in his words, of an arc-welder's spark, vertical, narrow, and the color of welding arc blue. The same color and the same shape that Eric Drover described from the Ocean Ranger 4 years earlier in the North Atlantic. That is the callback this list has been moving toward. 2 engineering disasters 4 years apart, on different continents, in different industries, with different technologies, observed by people who had never heard of each other, both of whom, given pen and paper at official inquiries, drew the same vertical narrow column of welding arc blue, lasting roughly 30 to 40 seconds, persisting in space after the structure beneath it moved. The Soviet investigation of the Chernobyl light column, undertaken by the Kurchatov Institute in May 1986 and led by physicist Valery Legasov, documented the column in 3 internal reports. The reports described the phenomenon as Cherenkov radiation-related ionization of moisture in the column of rising hot air over the exposed core. That is a plausible explanation for the light's color. It is not a plausible explanation for the column's geometry. Cherenkov radiation in air at ground-level concentrations of fission products is diffuse, not narrow-banded. It does not form columns with straight edges. Legasov, in his self-recorded testimony made in 1988, the recordings released after his death, said, "The light over the reactor was not Cherenkov. It was something else. We did not have a name for it." He did not name it. He killed himself 2 years later. The recordings were obtained by Soviet journalists in 1990 and have been broadcast multiple times. The official account remains Cherenkov ionization.
The detail that resists every explanation is this.
The Chernobyl light column appeared at 1:23:50 a.m. local time by Pravik's testimony taken with the timing of the second explosion. The Ocean Ranger column was logged by the Seaforth Highlanders mate Eric Drover at approximately 12:50 a.m. Newfoundland time on February 15, 1982. There is no causal connection between the two events. There is no shared technology, no shared environment, no shared physical mechanism that has been proposed which produces this geometry. There is only the same description, given independently by men who never met, of something they saw over a structure that was failing in front of them. What happened at number 1, 4 years after Chernobyl and 8 after the Ocean Ranger, is the third instance of this column. It is the one we have classified documents for, and the one no one has yet been able to read in full. October 5, 1990. Plesetsk Cosmodrome in Arkhangelsk Oblast, in the far north of the Soviet Union. The launch was a Zyklon 3 booster, carrying a Tselina D-class signals intelligence satellite, which after launch would have been catalogued under the standard Soviet civilian designation Cosmos 470. The launch, scheduled for 2300 local, was delayed twice for telemetry checks. It went up at 23:46. It came down 47 seconds later. The vehicle reached an altitude of approximately 14 kilometers, then experienced what the official TASS communique, issued on October 7th, called a control system anomaly, leading to vehicle destruction. The TASS communique was 41 words long. It was the only public Soviet statement about the launch for the next 17 years. The Plesetsk launch logs were classified. The on-pad and downrange recovery records were classified. The post-incident commission, led by chief designer Vladimir Utkin of KB Yuzhnoye, reported its findings only internally to the Council of Ministers in March of 1991. The first declassification of partial Plesetsk records occurred in 2007 under Russian Federation directives related to space program transparency. The 1990 records released were redacted in roughly 30% of their content. The second declassification, in 2014, released additional pages from the Utkin Commission. The third, in 2019, released photographs. What follows is from those releases, plus interviews conducted between 2008 and 2021 with 3 individuals who were on duty at Plesetsk on the night of October 5, 1990. Major Pyotr Anatolievich Severin, Deputy Launch Officer, Lieutenant Galina Stepanovna Voronova, Telemetry Analyst, and Igor Mikhailovich Peshkov, Civilian Engineer attached to the recovery team that went out at first light on October 6th to the impact zone. Severin, in a 2011 interview with the Russian aerospace historian Asif Siddiqui, said the booster's control system had not failed. The control system was nominal at T plus 47 seconds, when, in his words, the vehicle was no longer where the radar had predicted it would be, and an instant later was no longer in the air at all. Voronova, in a 2017 written statement, said her telemetry strip showed all onboard parameters within range up to T plus 46 seconds, then a single frame of corrupted data, then signal loss. The corrupted frame, when later analyzed, was not corruption. It was a complete telemetry packet from a vehicle whose physical orientation, as reported by its inertial unit, had inverted by roughly 180 degrees in less than 33 milliseconds. No physical force at 14 kilometers altitude can produce that. Peshkov, in a 2021 video interview given 7 months before his death, said the impact zone in the Tiger, when his team reached it, did not contain enough debris. A Cyclone 3 lower stage, tankage and engines, masses approximately 22,000 kilograms dry. The wreckage they found in the burn area massed, by his estimate, no more than a quarter of that. The remainder was not in adjacent forest. It was not in the lake to the south. It was not, 2 days later when overflights expanded the search, anywhere within a 30-kilometer radius. The on-the-ground team's report, which Peshkov says he co-signed, used the phrase «Не вся масса присутствует на месте». Not all of the mass is present at the site. The fourth detail, the one that is in the 2014 declassification, is from a security camera at the Plesetsk launch tower control bunker. The camera was pointed uprange. It captured 11 seconds of footage of the booster in flight, between T+36 and T+47 seconds. In the last 1.4 seconds of footage, the booster's airframe is visible against the night sky as a small, red-orange exhaust trail. Above the airframe, between T+45.6 and T+47.0 seconds, beginning approximately 3 vehicle lengths above the booster and persisting for the full 1.4 seconds, the camera records a vertical column of light. The column is narrow, no more than 3 to 4 meters wide at the resolution of the footage. It is straight-edged. It is the color of a welding arc. The same color, the same geometry, and the same approximate duration as the columns reported over the Ocean Ranger in 1982 and over Chernobyl Reactor 4 in 1986. The Cyclone 3 booster did not fly into the column. It approached the column from below, and at T+47.0 seconds, the column and the booster ceased to be observable on the same frame at the same time. The column, in the last frame in which it appears, is at the same position it occupied 1.4 seconds earlier. The booster is no longer at the position the radar projected for it. The booster, by the testimony of 3 witnesses, is no longer in the air at all.
3/4 of its mass was never recovered.
The Utkin Commission's internal report, in the version partially declassified in 2019, includes a paragraph that has not been released in full. The released portion reads, "The phenomenon observed at T+45.6 to T+47.0 seconds is consistent with previously recorded phenomena observed at non-rocketry industrial events." That sentence is the only sentence in the Commission report's findings section that is not redacted. The sentence following it is redacted in full. The list of previously recorded phenomena referenced in that sentence is redacted in full. The signature page of the report names Vladimir Utkin and 4 other Commission members. 3 of them were dead by 2010. The 4th, Major General Konstantin Gurchik, formerly head of Plesetsk operations, was approached for comment in 2018. He declined to confirm or deny the existence of the redacted list. He said only, "There are some things we wrote down because we had to write down something, and there are some things we knew we should not write down at all." He died in 2022. The case file remains partially classified. There are other engineering disasters this list could have included. There are other unexplained details. The reason these 10 are here, and not those, is that these 10 share something the others do not. In each of them, a specific object, a column, a cable, a steel plate, a rocket, failed in a way that the people closest to it could describe in detail and could not explain. And in 3 of them, the Ocean Ranger, the Chernobyl Reactor, and the Cyclone booster on its 47th second of flight, the failure was preceded, by seconds or by minutes, by a vertical narrow column of light, the color of an Arc-Welder's spark, observed and described in identical terms by people on 3 continents over the span of 8 years.
We do not have a name for it. We do not have a mechanism for it.
We have only the testimony, the inquiry transcripts, the partially declassified reports, and the small, consistent detail that engineering, when it fails, sometimes fails the way it should, and sometimes fails in ways that the men who were there never spoke of again. The light, in the photographs we do have, is the same color in all three.